I think one of your passions and missions is to tell people to embrace their circumstance and find a way to create value out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, welcome back to Fill in the Blanks. You guys know that I have a commitment to bringing you interesting people to talk to that you wouldn't necessarily run into in your life. And boy, is that true today. You're going to get an opportunity to listen in and hear a conversation with a really interesting person. I've never met anyone like this before, and I met him not long ago. His name is Izzy Ezagui. He was a decorated squad commander in Israeli Defense Forces. Now, what makes him unique? Well, he is the only soldier in the world who lost an arm in combat and returned to the battlefield. In 2011, former President Shimon Peres awarded him one of Israel's highest military honors. And while he continues to serve in an elite unit in the reserves, Izzy delivers inspirational speeches really around the world. And he's here to talk about his book that he took a long time in writing. This wasn't something that he just sat down and it just poured out. It's entitled Disarmed: Unconventional Lessons from the World's Only One-Armed Special Forces Sharpshooter. I'm really anxious to talk about all of this. So, Izzy, welcome to Fill in the Blanks.
Thank you for having me, sir.
Well, I'm really interested to talk to you about this whole situation. Now, you're an American, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you were living where when you were 17, 18, going to high school and all?
I grew up in Miami.
For your bar mitzvah, you went to Israel, correct?
That's correct. I went to Israel for my bar mitzvah. It was during the Second Intifada.
And so when you made that trip, you went with, was it just you and your parents?
And my sister. Yeah, it was a small family trip.
Okay. When you were there, you met some Israeli soldiers, correct?
Yeah, they're always out and about, traveling home from base. It's a very small country, so you see them everywhere.
You met and talked to some of these guys. Tell me about that and what impact it had on you.
The impact that I had meeting soldiers didn't happen when I was 13. It actually happened when I was 18. It was the second time that I had gone back. What impacted me most as a 13-year-old in Israel was having narrowly avoided the infamous Sbarro bombing. There was a pizzeria that was blown up when I was there. And we had just passed that intersection shortly beforehand. So it was my first
15 people killed, right?
Yeah, exactly. 15, somewhere around 15 people killed, many more wounded, and it was kind of just looping on the news. And I was sitting huddled with my family in the hotel room, watching footage of that. And that was really the first time that it dawned on me that I would maybe want to participate in not allowing that to happen again in the future.
Even at 13, you thought about that?
Looking back, that was like the first kernel that led to me volunteering for the IDF. But yeah, it was when I was 18 and I got to like actually meet soldiers who were my age, essentially my peers, who were doing something very different than I was at that age, that really pushed me to actually follow through.
Yeah. And how long after that second trip was it before you actually joined the military?
It was less than a year.
That's really an unusual thing. You're an American, you're living in Miami, and you go to Israel and join the armed forces over there. That's a big step.
Unusual is the right word for it. Yeah. No need to mince words. It's unusual. I'm a bit of a nerd. I grew up playing video games. I don't like not showering and spending days on end in the dirt without proper food. But the idea of protecting the Jewish people was a compelling enough reason to push against who I am and take that leap.
What'd your parents think about that?
It's interesting because their reaction to my original joining of the military was, I think, more the stereotype, which is that my father was worried but very proud. I think his pride overtook any fear of something happening. And my mother just cried. She cried endlessly leading up to that first time she watched me leave on the bus. And that changed quite dramatically later on, but we can get to that juxtaposition later. We can hold off.
And so how long had you been in when you sustained your injury?
The very day that I had finished training, which was about 9.5 months into my service, that very day we were sent home on our final weekend leave before we were going to be activated as combat soldiers. And it was that weekend that war broke out on the border of Gaza and my unit was sent there. So the first thing that I saw out of training was that operation.
This is January 8th, 2009. So this is your first day out of training.
Yep. Thrown right into it.
This was a really big mortar shell that landed near you, and you lost not just an arm, but your dominant arm, correct?
Yep. 120 millimeter mortar landed less than a foot away from me. It has, I believe, a 30-meter kill zone, and there was more than one of them that landed within that zone. We found helmets that were split in half. Three fellow soldiers were wounded alongside me, and miraculously, none of us were killed in action. But yeah, lost my dominant arm on the spot.
Obviously, this had to be a excruciatingly painful, shocking, horrible thing, but you said the thing that worried you most was what your mother's reaction was going to be.
Have you met any Jewish mothers over the years?
Yes, I have.
So yeah, they have a tendency to put the fear of God in you, even when you're going through something like this.
Yeah.
I was more afraid of her reaction and how she was going to find out than what I was going through. And that actually compelled me when we landed at the hospital. The helicopter landed at the hospital, and I saw TV crews trying to capture footage for the news. And I was so scared that she would see me that way that I actually bent down and grabbed a blanket that was resting by my feet. I used it to cover my face. And she did see me on TV, but she didn't know it was me. And that's the only reason that we're able to do this interview today, because she would have killed me.
Yeah, she would have finished the job?
Yep. I'm pretty confident that that's the case.
So how did she find out? I'm sure you at some point had to tell her, and how did you tell her, and what was her reaction?
The way she found out was just as dramatic, unfortunately. She got a knock on the door, and there were 3 officers standing outside. And if I'm not mistaken, here in the U.S., when that happens, it usually means that your son or daughter has already perished, and that was her initial thought. And to make matters worse, she barely spoke Hebrew, and they didn't speak any English. And they showed her a piece of paper, and on the paper, the only words in English were wounded, or critically wounded, and she just fell apart. And fortunately, one of the officers who was beside my stretcher when I was being rolled into the hospital was able to connect us over the phone. So I spoke to my mother even before I went into surgery. While I was bleeding out, I already had a battlefield amputation. I was able to talk to her. And even more than that, I was able to calm her down. I told her to listen to my voice. I asked her if she could hear that I was actually okay. And I asked her if she could be strong for me. And she calmed down immediately. And ever since, I mentioned that there was a drastic change in my parents' reaction when I decided to go back. And that's what I mean, is I've never seen her cry about it again. She seems to have become stronger through what happened. And my father's the one who is constantly trying to convince me, why do you have to go back? You did enough. He's the one who seems to have taken on the role of being more afraid.
You said there was a battlefield amputation?
Yeah. It wasn't done by the medics. It actually was done by the munition itself.
So they just controlled the bleeding, everything that they could at the time. And how long was it before they got you into surgery?
Well, I don't know how gruesome of a detail you want to get into here. So tell me if it's okay to share. There was so much blood that the first tourniquet that they put on slipped off, that was probably the most painful part of the whole experience. Tourniquets are painful even in training. You have to train on how to put them on. And even then, the pressure is tremendous. But when you have an actual amputation and they're tightening on that wound, and then it slips off, that was probably the most brutal element involved. So it took 2 of those, and a lot of lying. I lied to every medic that I came across. Every time they changed over hands, I kept telling them that I didn't get morphine yet. So I was like way, way overdosed, which I'm sure you wouldn't be happy about, you wouldn't recommend. But at the time, it felt like a great idea, and definitely changed the feeling at the moment.
I'm sure it did seem like a good idea at the time, and apparently it worked out because you're here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm okay. I'm not sure if I'm all right over here, but otherwise I survived it. I grabbed the medic on the helicopter and I asked him if they were going to reattach the arm, and he was able to tell me then already that because my elbow is what took the greatest damage, there was no way that they were going to be able to replace it. So I actually went under knowing that I would wake up minus my dominant arm.
And the fact that it was your dominant arm, I'm sure that made rehab that much harder because you had to relearn, retrain everything with your non-dominant arm. How long were you in the hospital and how long were you in rehab?
The hospital, I think I stuck around for about 6 months. A lot of that was in a haze. I have, even presently, I have severe phantom pain. It's something that I imagine I will have to keep dealing with. But I spent about 6 months in the hospital, pretty much skipped rehab entirely. As far as occupational therapy, learning how to do things, I decided that I was going to figure it out on my own.
And how do you think you do now in terms of efficiency of fine motor skills and all with your right arm versus what you originally did with your left arm?
I mean, we're very resilient, us human beings, and I think that when we aren't really given a choice, when we're back against the wall, we tend to find solutions very quickly. And because I didn't have a choice, it wasn't like I broke an arm and it was casted and I had to learn and I knew I would get it back. I knew that this was it. I learned extremely quickly. Granted, there are things that I still don't do very well. I can't cut steak. I have to ask the kitchen to cut it for me if on the rare occasion that I have one of those. I can't play guitar anymore, which is probably good for everyone else out there who would have had to listen. I was horrible. But it breaks down into 2 camps. It's things that I learned how to do just as well as I used to do, and things that I just avoid. And it's not even like a conscious thing. It's subconscious. I just avoid the things that I don't have the capacity to do, and have moved on with my life. I feel very comfortable.
Yeah. And your job in the military, you were a sharpshooter, correct?
Correct.
Is that a sniper? What exactly did that entail?
Yeah, there is a distinction between the two. A sniper is usually set up under cover somewhere, not usually in middle of the conflict where like troops are moving forward. Every unit that's advancing has sharpshooters at the very front of the attack force, and they are the individuals that are actually they actually have to take the enemy down. Most firing in the field is just to get people's heads down, to get the enemy's head down, and then there are the sharpshooters that are actually meant to hit targets. It's one of the harder roles in a conflict.
When you requalified and got back into the field, was it in a different job or the same job?
No, I continued to serve as a sharpshooter after the injury. I imagine it'll be interesting to hear that my targeting, my actual shooting, didn't suffer from the injury. What was harder was loading my rifle and unjamming it. That is really difficult minus an arm, and I had to figure out a few unique ways to get that done. But the shooting, I don't know. I guess I played enough video games. I mentioned I was a Miami Jewish nerd playing Xbox growing up, and I think that hand-eye coordination really helped me out later on.
I've shot a lot of rifles and all, and it seemed like a really two-hand job, one down the barrel and one at the trigger mechanism. How did you do that? How did you work it out?
I mean, it really does depend on the weapon. Some are tougher than others. At the time, Israel had introduced a rifle called the Tavor, and they had a smaller version of it called the Micro Tavor, and most of the weight lies on the back of the rifle. So when you're holding it by the grip, the weight's not leaning forward, and that gave you a little extra wiggle room to hold on to it. It didn't require as much strength. I'm not going to pretend like it was easy, but I figured it out.
And so how long were you back in the field afterwards?
I served another 2 years after I was injured. I obviously had to prove myself combat worthy again. That was a whole process. I was given a month to retake all the tests that a combat soldier usually has 8 months to finish. So I had to learn how to shoot, load, and unjam my assault rifle. How to do obstacle courses in full combat gear that include climbing a rope, jumping over a 7-foot wall, crawling a long distance. I eventually figured out how to pull grenade pins by tying tape around the pin so that it served as like a cushion, and then I pulled it out with my teeth like Rambo. So yeah, it was more a matter of just taking the time and giving myself the space to figure out how I was going to do all those things. That was the easy part. And then the hard part was convincing the military to give me that opportunity, because they were obviously reluctant to put someone in my situation back in a combat environment.
Why did they do that? What did you do to convince them? I'm interested in that because I know that you do a lot of motivational speaking and that sort of thing now. That first motivational speech had to be to convince them to let you do it again.
I've never quite looked at it that way, but that's very true. I had to motivate a lot of different people who were reluctant at the start. And if I'm being entirely honest, that strength came from my parents, because it wasn't some afterthought that I wanted to go back. The very first thing I said when I woke up is that I intended to continue my role in combat. And granted, this is right after an injury. I was on a lot of medication, a lot of painkillers. But I remember looking up at my parents the first time that I woke up in my hospital bed and telling them that I planned to go back. And my father burst into tears and he said, "How could you even joke about something like that after what happened to you?" And my mother, who's standing on the other side of the bed, she turns to him and says, "If this is what his heart is telling him, we have to stand behind him. We have to let him give this a shot." And I'm lying there and I'm watching them argue back and forth about my going back to combat. And I wasn't focused on my father's fears. I wasn't even focused on the insane strength that my mother was showing by considering something like this. I was reading between the lines, and what I saw there is that they both believe that I can do it. My father may not have wanted me to do it, but he believed that I could. And that gave me so much strength. That belief fueled every single interaction that I had with the generals that would come to visit in the hospital, the politicians. And I went through every rotation. I asked every single one of them if they would help me go back. And eventually I got the answer I was looking for. I found one general that when I was ready, gave me the opportunity to retest.
So your parents taking it seriously, like not just that you wanted to do it, but they thought he could actually do this. So we need to take this seriously.
Yeah, I mean, that'll give you strength for sure.
Now, where does this come from? Because you're describing yourself as this nerd sitting down in Miami, not distinguishing yourself as an athlete or anything particular at the time. But then here we go, this takes place and you do what you do. You wind up being the only soldier in the world to do this. Why? Why you?
So if you would have asked me why I was joining the first time around, it was ideologically driven. It was wanting to protect the Jewish people. If you would ask me the second time around, it was because I needed there to be a reason for what happened. I didn't want to put my injury in the hands of fate or a higher power. I decided that if there was going to be a reason, it had to be of my own making. And the only thing that I can think of that would give it purpose was to do something special with it. I understood that if I went back, I would be able to inspire the soldiers around me. And more selfish than that, I understood that if I went back, it was almost as if I was undoing the damage. I told myself that if I continue serving in a combat role, which is what I was doing before the injury, after the injury, then it's as if it never happened. And in a large way, that is what I managed to do, because as soon as I was back in combat, there were full days where I just totally forgot that I had an injury. I was just me again. I was whole. And I like to think that for the most part, I've kind of carried that into civilian life. I still walk around Los Angeles and I don't really feel disabled. I don't carry myself that way. I don't think of myself that way. And because of that, most people don't see me that way either.
Well, you said that you wrote this book with your fellow millennials in mind, not necessarily those with military ambitions, but just everybody facing challenges in life.
Yeah. I mean, unconventional lessons. It's not a step-by-step guide on how to accomplish anything specific. The memoir is about as unconventional as I am. But I wanted the people who took the time to read it, to leave with the idea that if a Jewish nerd from Miami can go back to combat after he loses an arm, they could probably accomplish whatever it is that they're striving to accomplish in life. And if I manage to do that in any way, that's a win.
And I think you make a good point, because you're very self-deprecating in that, but you say if a self-described nerd, a one-arm basket case like you can accomplish what you set your mind to, that anybody from any walk of life, whatever their circumstance, can become a hero in his or her own life. What do you mean by that? Talk more about that.
I mean, I think you just said it right there. Don't you agree that seeing another case of somebody who isn't really spectacular in any way, even today, I've had that adventure. I've gone on the adventure of a lifetime. I've traveled to a foreign planet, if you want to call it that. Done the whole Luke Skywalker thing on that mission, and I still complain about paper cuts, and I still have the same issues day to day that we all have. It's not like I solved this massive problem. It's just that I cared enough about a certain cause to figure it out, to pull off one extraordinary event. Does that read with you? Do you not think that we can all do that, given the right motivation, that we can all pull something like that off?
Well, I don't think situations like yours or any other situations make heroes. I think situations, circumstances, challenges reveal who someone is. I think if a circumstance comes up like you were in, or a natural disaster occurs and someone distinguishes themselves, I think all that situation did was give them a stage, an opportunity to reveal who they were all along. It just wasn't called on until that time. And I've seen people in the aftermath of hurricanes or tornadoes or in the California fires that do extraordinary things to help other people, to overcome incredible obstacles to save themselves, their families, their neighbors, other people's lives, who were nondescript individuals that you would walk by every day and never so much as notice. And their touted as heroes. I think they were heroes all along. They were just waiting for the time that they were called upon to be who they have always been. And I think that is the same thing with you. I tell people, look, you need to star in your own life. You need to decide who you are and what you stand for, and don't be reactive. You need to find a passion, pursue it with vigor, and be the star in your own life. Don't be a bit player in your own life. To me, that makes perfect sense. And sometimes I have people say, well, that's easy for you. You have a television platform. You have millions of people that watch. It's easy to think about starring in your own life. But I think it's true if you're a plumber or a school teacher or a parking lot attendant or a stay-at-home mom or dad. I think it's important that people do and can find a way to star in their own life. You got to be who you are on purpose, and that begins with finding that purpose and then saying, why am I here? You know, Viktor Frankl said it really well when he was in the death camps. He said, they can control everything about me, whether I live, die, sit, stand, eat, starve, but they can't control my attitude. That's internal to me, and that I control, and that's where it begins. You know, I've spent a lot of time teaching negotiation skills. I take a kind of unconventional approach to it, whether it's in business or between a mother and a kid or whatever. If there are two sides to something, I always encourage people to say, okay, I want you to go into this with one value and one first step to the approach. And the one value is not that I'm going to try to get everything I can out of this negotiation, but I already know what I need to have. I'm going to go into this with the value of trying to see how much of what they want I can get for them in this negotiation. I know my bottom line. I'm not going to agree to something if I know what I need. I don't need to focus on that right now. What can I do to get them as much of what they need as I possibly can? Now, to do that, I have to listen, because I can't know what's important to them if I don't listen. Because we may want very different things here that are mutually exclusive, and I might be able to give them what they need without sacrificing what I need. And I only know that if I listen. It might be money's important to me and time's important to them. You know, a mother and a teen, it might be freedom's important to the child and safety's important to the parent. So if you can figure a way that she feels safe and he feels free, those aren't necessarily at odds.
So listening is your magic pill. People listening to one another, which doesn't happen anymore. What can be done? What is, like, just even a fake scenario, an all-powerful thing? What can be done that points us in that direction, as opposed to like moving further towards where we're heading?
Part of it is requiring people to reflect feeling and content. We have too much one-way communication where people are talking and nobody reflects back what they just heard, either in content or emotion, which means they didn't hear what was being said. That's a one-way communication model instead of a two-way communication model. If you add that loop back in, all of a sudden we have people that are actually talking with someone instead of at someone. And we've stopped doing that. We're yelling at one another right now in a strident way, instead of, before we can make a point, we have to reflect their point. And that's just not happening. We've stopped doing that. If you and I were in this, to use this as an example, I would have to say, what you want me to respond with is to give you some kind of example where it would illustrate what I'm talking about and how that can be applied to the divisiveness that we have right now. Give me a working example. Give me a working model, is what you asked me. And you don't know that I've heard that until I reflect that back to you.
I already feel differently about your response because you just did that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And because I reflect it back to you means, okay, I've heard you. So then your response might be, okay, now do it. Okay, you heard me now. That's
why
great.
don't you? Let's do it. Let's figure this out. Let's fix America.
Yeah, and that's what happens in negotiation when I say, okay, I'm going to go in and say, how much of what they want can I get for them? Then I'm going in there saying, okay, this isn't all about me. And then secondly, I've got to go into it and say, I've got to listen because we may want, as I was saying before, very different things, because oftentimes I'll start out by saying, okay, before we begin, I want us to talk about everything we agree on before we talk about the things we disagree on. Because when you do that, you find out, you know what? We have more in common than we thought we did. We both want this country to do well. We both want to be safe and secure. We both want to prosper. We might have a long list of things that we agree on, and maybe we can bond over those things. Now, what are the few things that we disagree on? And they may be monumental, but we at least have some commonality before we get to those things. Let's build a positive base here before we get to the problem solving. What do we agree on before we talk about the things we don't agree on? If you start with the things you don't agree on, you're in an immediate fight.
So much of it is about perspective. And when you start from the perspective, we agree on all of these things, let's now deal with the rest of it. It doesn't come across as a blatant attack. It doesn't come across as they are the other, the enemy. Yeah, I think that's maybe a good exercise to start implementing. Maybe the next time you do something with students is to find that common ground first. It would have been interesting to see that done.
It's astounding when you do that with people that have a lot in common, like age, both in a university or an institution, both work at the same company. Maybe everybody's a parent. Maybe everybody, you see these school boards melting down and turning into fist fights and police coming in. Wait a minute. Time out. Let's make a list on the board here of everything we agree on. We will get to the issues in a minute, but what do we agree on? We all want our kids to be educated. We all want them to be safe. We all want them to come home without being bullied. We all want them to have good self-esteem. We all want them to have success experiences. We're all responsible parents. We all want these for our kids. Now, what are the issues that we maybe don't agree on? And how can we fold these into these agree issues over here? People aren't doing this. When I work with groups, I try to get them to focus on that. And you see the groups change when you do it. You see individuals change when you do it. So that's my answer.
Yeah. I mean, you've got your work cut out for you. I wish you luck with it. I don't envy that job.
No, it's not an easy job, but I do think it's a worthwhile job because people say this is the worst it's ever been. Well, you know, there was the Civil War. There were times where it got a little more contentious.
Yeah, we're back to perspective. That's true. That's when you frame it that way. We have had some really tough times in the relatively short history of this country, and we've found our way back. So why not do it again?
The book is Disarmed: Unconventional Lessons from the World's Only One-Armed Special Forces Sharpshooter. I told you this was going to be an interesting conversation. I stand by what I said. Izzy is an author. He's a screenwriter. He's an actor. He's a blogger. And I'm so glad I met you recently. I'm so glad you took this time to talk about this. Keep doing what you're doing, man. And I hope to see you again very soon.
Thank you, Dr. Phil. This was a sincere pleasure. I appreciate it.
And for me as well. I'm proud to know you, and I look forward to seeing more of you in the future.
Be well.
All right, take care. Thanks for being here.